Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're digging into a pretty tense situation. It's this meeting coming up. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney heading to the White House October 7th. He's meeting President Trump. And, well, let's just say it's not exactly a friendly chat planned.
No, definitely not. The sources we've looked at, government briefings, economic data, political commentary, they all point to something much more intense. Officially, it's about a new economic and security relationship.
Right.
But really, our mission here, for you listening, is to get right to the heart of it. We need to understand the frankly crushing economic pressure Canada's under because of these tariffs. And then there's this renewed drama about the 51st state talk. Why now? And, maybe most importantly, what cards does Canada actually hold in these talks? What's their real leverage?
Right. And this isn't just abstract politics. It affects, real things. We're talking about the CUSMA trade deal, the world's second biggest free trade zone. If things go south here, you could feel it in manufacturing jobs, maybe the cost of buying a car, certainly housing costs with these lumber tariffs. This is where it gets real. So let's dive in, starting with that economic pain.
Yeah, the tariffs. That's absolutely the core issue. Carney is walking into that meeting knowing he has to get some kind of relief from Trump's sectoral tariffs. Otherwise, he's facing a huge political headache back home.
And the numbers behind that headache, they're pretty stark, aren't they?
They really are. I mean, look at unemployment in Canada. It hit 7.1% in August. Now, if you take out the weird spike during the pandemic, that's the highest it's been since way back in May 2016. That number alone is setting off alarm bells all over Ottawa.
And it's not like a general economic dip, is it? These tariffs seem targeted. Which industries are really feeling the squeeze from this?
Oh, it's heavily focused on, well, heavy industry. Steel and aluminum producers are dealing with what the sources are calling crushing 50% tariffs. 50%. And the effect, it's direct. Steel production dropped 30% just in May. But here's something really telling politically. The Canadian government had to step in. They gave a $400 million loan just to keep Algoma Steel afloat. That's not just an economic statistic. That's practically an admission that the current strategy isn't working and taxpayers are footing the bill.
Wow. And then just to add fuel to the fire, days before this crucial meeting, the U.S. piles on more tariffs.
Exactly. A new 10% levy on softwood lumber, plus a 25% tariff on Canadian cabinets and furniture, both set to kick in mid-October.
That lumber one sounds particularly nasty. You mentioned stacking duties.
Yeah, it's brutal for producers, especially in British Columbia. That new 10% gets piled on top of existing duties, countervailing and anti-dumping duties. Just quickly for you listening, anti-dumping is basically a penalty tax when a country thinks goods are being sold too cheaply, undercutting their own producers. So you stack all that up, and suddenly BC lumber is facing a total tariff rate of 45%.
45%.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's crippling. It essentially slams the door shut on the U.S. market for a lot of Canadian mills.
Okay, so you can see why the pressure is mounting back in Canada. We're seeing the opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, asking tough questions like, where is the win? Especially since Carney apparently missed his own deadline back in July for getting a deal done. And Canada already made some concessions, right? They dropped their own retaliatory tariffs, pulled back a digital tax, and got nothing back from the U.S. side.
That's right. That move, dropping their own tariffs without getting anything in return, it suggests they're really trying to clear the air, create some space to negotiate. But let's flip this around. This pain.
Yeah.
It's not just a Canadian problem. And that, right there, is probably Canada's best leverage point. We saw Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer saying publicly these tariffs have been incredibly challenging for her state.
Michigan, yeah. Agriculture and manufacturing getting hit there, too.
Exactly.
And the Great Lakes region, I mean, those economies are so tightly linked. Ontario and Michigan, what is it, like $61 billion in trade just between them?
Annually, yes. Think about the auto sector. A single part might cross the border, back and forth multiple times, stamping in Detroit, assembly in Windsor, maybe back again.
Right.
When you slap a tariff on each crossing, you're not just taxing Canada, you're taxing the efficiency of American manufacturing, too.
Okay, so that's the auto sector. But the U.S. vulnerability goes deeper.
Oh, much deeper. And into areas like national security. Canada isn't just some supplier. It's the largest foreign source of steel, aluminum, and uranium for the United States. And critically, Canada supplies 34 minerals and metals that the Pentagon has identified as critical, things they need to secure.
34 critical minerals.
Yes. This isn't just about trade anymore. This is about the military supply chain. We even heard the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, kind of hint there might be wiggle room on aluminum tariffs. Why? Because, as he pointed out, Ford trucks use a lot of aluminum. That reliance, that's the real structural bargaining chip for Canada.
Okay, so we have this intense economic pressure cooker on one side, but then running alongside it is this, well, bizarre political theater. The 51st state idea is back just before this meeting. Seems like a deliberate tactic.
It certainly seems timed that way. And it was very public. President Trump brought it up in a speech to military leaders, and he specifically linked it to that Golden Dome missile defense system proposal.
So he basically said if Canada wants in on the defense system, they should just join the U.S.
That's pretty much the gist. The quote was something like, Canada called me a couple of weeks ago. They want to be part of it. To which I said, well, why don't you just join our country? Become 51, become the 51st state, and you get it for free.
Wow.
It's classic Trump. Framing cooperation not as a partnership, but as a transaction tied to, well, annexation.
And Carney's response has been pretty clear on this, hasn't it? I remember back in May, he used that real estate line.
Yes. He told Trump, as you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
To which Trump replied, never say never. Still sends a chill down your spine.
It does.
Yeah.
But this rhetoric, it's not just, noise. It reflects a real shift, maybe even a rift. Carney himself said earlier that the old relationship, the one based on deep integration, is over. He followed that up by saying quite bluntly, it's clear the U.S. is no longer a reliable partner.
That's a huge statement. Coming from a Canadian prime minister about the U.S., that's major. So what has this pivot looked like? If the U.S. isn't reliable, where is Canada turning?
Well, diversification, mainly, and focusing on hard security with other allies. When you say your biggest partner isn't reliable, you naturally look elsewhere. So Carney's been actively building closer ties, security, economic with the UK, with France, Australia. For example, they're now working together on Arctic radar systems. That used to be almost exclusively a U.S.-Canada thing.
Interesting. So looking to NATO partners instead of just relying on the U.S.
Essentially, yes. Especially given the more, shall we say, isolationist tendencies coming from the U.S. recently.
And domestically in Canada, how are these 51st state comments landing?
Well, interestingly, the polls mentioned in the sources suggest it's actually kind of backfired on Trump. It seems to have boosted Canadian national pride, made people dig their heels in.
But there's still a risk for Carney going into this meeting, isn't there, with this hanging in the air?
A huge risk. Daniel Bayland, he's a political science professor, pointed this out. He warned that one big risk is Trump bringing up the 51st state thing again, maybe right in the meeting, specifically to publicly embarrass Carney. So Carney's got this incredibly fine line to walk. He needs tariff relief desperately for his political survival at home, but he absolutely cannot look like he's trading away Canadian sovereignty or dignity to get it.
Okay, so that's the tightrope. Let's talk strategy. How does Canada play this? What's the actual goal here? What are they asking for?
The immediate tactical goal is pretty straightforward. They need an off-ramp from these damaging sectoral tariffs. They seem to be hoping for a series of one-off sector-specific tariff deals. Get those resolved now before the really big negotiation starts.
And that really big negotiation is the CUSMA review in 2026.
Exactly. That's the elephant in the room. This meeting is happening just as both countries are starting consultations for that first big review of the trade deal. Remember, CUSMA is set to expire in 2026 if it's not renewed. So Canada's whole strategy seems to depend on keeping these current tariff fights separate from the massive CUSMA review.
Why is that separation so crucial? Why not just roll the steel and lumber issues into the main CUSMA talks?
Because that would give the U.S. enormous leverage. If these current tariffs, the 50% on steel, 45% on lumber, become bargaining chips within the CUSMA renewal process, then President Trump could basically hold the entire $1.5 trillion North American free trade zone hostage. He could demand concessions on these specific politically driven tariffs as the price for renewing the whole deal.
Oh, okay.
So Canada's Trade Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, he's been very clear. These tariff issues need to be sorted out now, separately. It's a deliberate move to try and contain the damage and protect the main CUSMA agreement, which Carney keeps calling the best trade deal.
Right. He keeps hammering that point that 85% of Canadian exports to the U.S. are still tariff-free under CUSMA, so the foundation is strong.
That 85% is the baseline, yeah.
Yeah.
But the real leverage Canada thinks comes from that internal U.S. pressure we talked about. LeBlanc pointed this out. You've got American senators, governors, business groups, even unions, all starting to feel the negative impact of these tariffs.
Right, the blowback.
Exactly. Canada's hoping to mobilize those voices within the U.S. as allies.
But even with that pressure, success isn't guaranteed. One source, a former foreign affairs minister, mentioned a sense of volatility around this meeting.
And that volatility sums up Carney's challenge perfectly. He has to get immediate trade relief to save jobs, save key industries, quiet the political noise at home. But at the same time, he has to stand absolutely firm on sovereignty, push back against that 51st state stuff. The sources really suggest his success hinges on two things: persuading the U.S. to deal with the tariff separately from CUSMA and effectively using that internal U.S. business pressure.
It really is an unprecedented kind of diplomatic challenge. Now, we focused a lot on how these tariffs are hitting Canadian exports like lumber and steel. But let's just circle back for a moment to the other side of the equation. The U.S. depends on Canada. We touched on minerals.
That's right. Canada isn't just a place that buys and sells things. It's fundamental to how the U.S. functions.
Yeah, the sources confirm Canada supplies something like 60% of U.S. crude oil imports. 60%. And an incredible 85% of U.S. electricity imports.
Huge numbers.
So, if this economic conflict keeps escalating, if Canada can't get that off-ramp on tariffs, you have to wonder, how long before Canada starts thinking about using its energy leverage, its critical mineral supply, the very things keeping the lights on and factories running in parts of the U.S.? Could that be the next shoe to drop, turning a trade spat into a full-blown energy security crisis for the U.S., something for you to definitely chew on as these talks unfold next week?